أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Our guest speaker for the afternoon is a gentleman most of you are rather familiar with. He is Mr. Mohammed, a gentleman who is he's a qualified CA for more than 30 years. The last time he addressed us on disruptive technologies, was it? He was CEO at he was CEO at Tafseer at the time. He served for about 13 years in the role of interim group CFO as well as group CEO. He presented his findings to the Zondo Commission regarding the corruption at the time at Transnet, and left after presenting among the best results in Transnet's history. At present, he is serving as CEO at Amanat to try and help them navigate the troubled times they find themselves in recently. And this afternoon, we look forward to hearing his thoughts on corporate governance, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I think first and foremost, Haafiz, Fuzail and the team here, in granting us the opportunity to be here today. We hope and pray that inshallah that whatever we say first is beneficial to us and to the broader community. I think with recent experiences, we've looked at very many institutions, some close to home, some further away from home. And the lack of corporate governance or the corporate governance failures, the number of failures in business today are increasing quite significantly. If we talk to some of our elders, we'll hear of sporadic incidents in the past. But today, when you look at it, the number of incidences grow quite significantly. In just the recent few years, if you look at things that have affected us, some directly and others indirectly. In some cases, we don't actually think they affect us, but they do. And I take one example being Steinhoff, and another being the Tonga Group. Steinhoff wiped out 200 billion rand in market capitalization. How many of us were impacted directly? But I can guarantee you, if you have a pension fund, you were impacted. If you have unit trusts, you were impacted. Whether you think you were impacted or not, guaranteed you were impacted. It was one of those shares that every asset manager thought it necessary to buy at the time. Tonga Tulip was from a high of 140 rand, went down to a trading price of 1.40 rand. And when you look at all of the issues, when you look at the root cause analysis of all these companies, there's only one thing that they come up with, it's governance failure. Recently in the press, if you're following the last few weeks, there's a company called FTX. It's gone from $32 billion in market capitalization to bankruptcy this week. $32 billion will be rated as amongst one of the most significant bankruptcies in the history of mankind. The last significant one was Enron at $23 billion. Some estimate the losses of FTX will be in the region of $50 billion. The question on that one is whether it was cryptocurrency or kleptocurrency. But this is not new. Theft and fraud is not new. It wasn't something that came up in the last 5 years, 10 years, the last 50. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, largely based in the United States, in the 2020 report suggests that in businesses in general, 5% of your revenue is lost to theft and fraud. So to the business people out there who think that there's no theft and fraud in your business, you need to rethink that. In the entities that they reviewed in 2020, the losses exceeded $3.6 billion in 191 different cases. And here's the kicker. 55% of the fraud, more than half, was perpetrated by senior executives, directors, owners and co-owners. So the people that we put in charge, the people that we trust to run organizations, businesses and family businesses, more than half of them are bound to commit acts of theft and fraud. That's a very serious indictment on executives. We have to think about the lessons that we learn. It unfortunately comes across that we tend to go through different cycles in life and we learn no lessons. We take nothing, we change nothing. The example that I always use is if a baker makes a particular cake and it flops, if he constantly uses the same ingredients, the same oven, and it's the same baker, the probability of success or getting a better cake is 0. So he hasn't learned any lessons. He's going to have to change something in those 3 key aspects. Either you're going to have to look at the ingredients and make some changes, calibrate your oven if it's not calibrated correctly, and after all of these attempts, then you may have to change the baker. And the last one is the most difficult one, because that's what we don't want to do as businesses. That's what we don't want to do as executives. We find it difficult, but particularly in our Islamic organizations as well. We'll touch on that just now. So all that I'm touching on at the moment is what I call governance in your lifetime. Because there's a second part that I want to talk about later on, governance on your departure. So think about this example of the cake as we talk through today. Because the reality is that many a family is split asunder today by people that have been put in place for positions of authority and they don't execute their accountability correctly. Businesses are failing, estates and wills haven't been wound up, beneficiaries are not paid. The key issues that we have to think about are what are the root causes. Because if we go to a doctor and we keep getting treatment for the symptomatic diagnosis, then we actually don't solve the problem. And where do we get these from? Where do we get the solutions from? And one of the challenges that we have is that today people, the talk of the town is corporate governance. In the corporate world, that's all they speak about. Governance, King 4, all of these fancy things. Yet, on examination of the Holy Quran, which should be our first port of call, we find that in verse 282 of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah explicitly tells us about certain things when He talks about financial dealings. And we tend to ignore this Quranic injunction. It is amongst the longest ayahs of the Quran. It is also amongst the last ones that were revealed unto the Prophet ﷺ. I've been reading this over and over again and I find it astounding as to the level of detail Allah goes into this 1400 years ago. Give it some context. At a time when most transactions were done by what we would call today the handshake. Most transactions were done verbally. None were done in writing. Allah says in the Quran, verse 282, and I'm not going to read you the full translation of the ayah, it's quite a long ayah. I'll read you parts of it. O you who have believed, when you contract a debt for a specified term, write it down. Now listen to the detail in which Allah goes to this. And let it be scribed between you in justice. Let no scribe refuse to write it as Allah has taught him. Let him write, and let the one with the obligation dictate. And let him fear Allah, his Lord, and not leave anything out of it. But if the one who has the obligation is of limited understanding, or weak, or unable to dictate himself, then let his guardian dictate in his stead, in justice. And bring to witness 2 witnesses from amongst your men. Today, legal agreements require you for 2 witnesses in most of our major transactions. The Quran told us about this 1400 years ago. Not yesterday, not 5 years, not 100 years, not from Anglo-Roman law, not from the common law. This is from 1400 years in the Quran, untouched. Another part of the ayah says, and do not be too wary to write it, whether it is small or large. Allah goes further on to say, that is more just in the sight of Allah, and stronger as evidence, and more likely to prevent doubt between you. Continues, and then Allah says, and fear Allah. And Allah teaches you. This is what Allah says in the Quran, and Allah teaches you. What are the lessons that we take from this? We still seem to operate on the implicit trust in individuals, and then we are surprised when that trust is broken and betrayed. What surprise? We say, I trusted him. But the Quranic injunction, verse 282, is reduced to writing. The only exception in this ayah is except when it is an immediate transaction which you conduct amongst yourselves, where you have a purchase and sale taking place in that immediate instant, then you don't need to do this. But otherwise, for any transaction that you've got, investments, loans, all those fall into this category of financial transaction that Allah says, reduce it to writing. Failure to adhere to the Quran will bring you nothing but failure. Analyzing this, and I'm not going to be giving you a tafseer of this ayah because I'm not qualified in any aspect of that. Bringing in competent persons. Allah says here very clearly, if the one who has the obligation who is of limited understanding, weak or unable, then his guardian must dictate in justice. So to the professionals that are out here, the lawyers, the accountants, we have an obligation from the Quran to operate with justice, not in the defense of the wrong, not to put the best deal forward that is contrary to the agreement, not to try to get the best fees out of a client. As I said, the witnesses were 2 men. Allah talks about, don't be wary and ignore small transactions. Whether it be small or large, you have to follow these rules. And what's the objective? Prevent doubt between you. So when we look at what I term the governance in our daily lives, in our lifetime, the root causes of failure is related to the fact that we have implicit trust in an individual, whether it's earned or not, whether it's warranted or otherwise. The consequence of that implicit trust is that we have completely, at some point, zero oversight of what the person does. So we don't ask, we don't interrogate, we don't check. We wait for it to fail, then we ask. Corporate governance from taking from the precepts of Quran. You're supposed to manage your financial affairs. This is an amana to you. And we have a number of instances where the accountable person has abused his position of trust. So the question is, what should we do? How should we operate? An incident comes to mind. In the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, he was Amir al-Mu'mineen of the time, the leader of the Muslims. He comes home one evening, it's the eve of the Eid al-Fitr, and he finds his wife is crying. And comes to learn that she's crying because in the rest of the community, people are getting their kids' clothing ready for the morning of Eid. And in his house, there is no clothing for his kids. There's nothing decent, nothing new, nothing good to wear. So she says to him, "Oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, will you make your way to the Bayt al-Mal and ask the treasurer to give you some advance on your next month's salary?" Reluctantly, he makes his way to the treasurer and he narrates his plight. And he says, "Can you please give me a few days advance on my salary?" And the treasurer says to him, "I have no issue with that. Can you provide me a guarantee that you will have those few days of life?" We have to ask, when we are in positions of power, what is the governance that we hold ourselves to? Because that's one other problem. We want to hold everybody else to the highest standards, and ourselves, we tend to allow multitude of variations and deviations. So when you go back and you ask yourself, now that cake that was a flop, those governance failures, you have three things, right? You have the baker, you have the equipment, and the ingredients. So the first thing we should look at is look at the tools, the ingredients that are available to us. And what do we change in that? Be just to all, but never trust all. So this implicit trust that we have in anybody and everybody needs to be reined in. We need to have proper structures in place where people are transparent with what they provide to you in your business dealings, in your investment schemes, in your family matters as well. There's got to be transparency, there's got to be accountability. People must know what they need to do. I'm investing with you. What is the mandate of that investment? What can you do? What can't you do? When do you report to me? What do you report to me? Not after 20 years, not after 53 years, not after 48 years. There should be regularity of review of what the individual has been mandated to do and whether he's actually executing on that mandate. Use people with the right level of expertise. Not because somebody else told you that this guy is a good guy, or he's an honest guy, or he's a good broker. You have to use people with the right skill set. We don't go and ask a lawyer for advice when it comes to our medical issues. But yet we seem to be taking advice on matters of finance from anybody that is available to hand it out to us. I know of a very good transaction. I know of a good deal. That's all I need to tell you, and then you just need to know the return and you're in. With no review. We need to hold people accountable. If somebody does something wrong, they must be brought to book. No matter how good they may be purported to be, but if they did something wrong, then they be given a chance to present their case. But we cannot sit back and say, no, it's fine. I was told in one seminar that I was giving, and somebody said it was an Islamic institution, and they said, but it's very different in the corporate world. Because you can terminate somebody for wrongdoing, they go through a disciplinary process and they're done. But the problem in an Islamic institution is we've got to now meet that guy for Zohar, and it's a little bit of a problem. So I said, I've got a bigger problem. How are you going to meet Allah saying that that man was taking public funds and he was doing wrong and you were happy with it? Public organizations require an even higher level of accountability. Many an instance in public organizations, there are millions that have been gone, that have either been squandered, they've been used illegitimately, but we've got a very big, in our community we have a very high carpet, because we keep sweeping it under the carpet. And we don't hold people accountable. So these are the things I suggest, but these are the governance aspects that we need to put in place when we are alive. But there are also governance that we have to put in place and prepare for when we have to leave this world. The one thing that we are most certain of is death, yet it is the thing that we prepare the least for. In the years that we had, in the preceding couple of years with COVID, the number of problems that people experienced when it came to the execution of wills, some of them are still bleeding today from the ills of the people that passed on. And when I say that, what I mean is, in a number of instances, wills were not even available. In South Africa, they say, and this is across the spectrum, so not limited to the Muslim community, but in South Africa, 75% of the people that die without wills. Take advice, because the Prophet ﷺ, again, let's not go too far away from Quran and Sunnah. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, this is recorded in Bukhari Sharif, it is the duty of a Muslim who has anything to bequest not to let 2 nights pass without writing a will about it. Verses 10 to 14 in Surah Nisa are explicit about the laws of inheritance. Verse 10 starts off with something to the effect that you will see the wrath of Allah in hellfire when you devour the property of orphans. And then verses 11 and 12 go into fractions and percentages of who shall inherit what. It is into that level of detail. And yet we have disputes that are going on for 20 years on the execution of estates, 50 years. Why? Because we provide no clarity to the people that have to take the mantle after we leave. Because in some cases we think we're too young. We'll do that when it happens. Simple things that create problems. I give you examples that are practical, not some theoretical academic examples. The son works for his father for 25 years. And he says, I built this organization with my father, but my father didn't give me the equity or the share of the business. And when the father dies, the rest of the siblings inherit. And the son says, but I built this business with my father. And he told me that he was going to give me the equity. But he didn't. It's not written down. He didn't transfer the equity. And then the fight starts. I'll give you another simple example. 2 brothers. One gives a certain amount of money 30 years ago, 40 years ago to the brother. Now that brother passed on. And he says, I need my money. I'm using an illustrative example of the value, but this is practically what's happening. So it was 50,000 and 30 years ago. the questions that were posed to him was it a gift? Was it a loan? Or did you lend him the money to start his business? Because if it was a gift, you're entitled to nothing. If it was a loan, 30 years later, you're still entitled to 50,000. But if it was an equity investment, then today, in say the 50%, you now have a right of 50% in his business. But we don't think these things through. We spend a lot of time thinking about other things, but we need to spend time in terms of the governance around wills, our estates. What will happen when we leave? Will we leave a legacy for our children to be fighting over? Or will we leave a legacy for them that will be streamlined, and they will live with happiness, and allow those monies to become a source of our goodness when we're not here? Verse 11, the latter part of this verse, Allah says, be fair to your parents and children, this is relating to the words, as you do not know fully who is more beneficial to you. The key takeaways for today, from my perspective, we need to make sure that we have our financial affairs in order. We need to have proper wills in place. And don't duck those wills and those records, because when you're gone, nobody will find it. Nobody will find it. And then some banker or somebody is going to have a merry day for you with your assets. When it comes to governance, make sure you have the right review mechanisms in place. Whether it's related to an investment you make, whether it's related to your own business that you hand over to your son or your nephews or whoever it is, understand that they can also make mistakes. But you need to have the right reviews in place. And fundamentally, I want to leave you with this one message, because we see too many Islamic organizations folding after the death of founders, or having problems that they sweep under the carpet. Ensure that our Islamic organizations have the right level of governance. Ensure that the Islamic organizations have a proper succession plans in place for sustainability. Because that, inshallah, will leave for you a legacy that will earn your akhirah, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.